In this video, I'll be talking about HBase. HBase is an open source big table clone that's built on top of the Hadoop framework. So what is HBase? HBase is a NoSQL database that's based on Google's big table. HBase stores data as key value pairs, similar to DynamoDB. So here we have an example of an HBase table, and the rows in an HBase table are ordered and accessed by a row key. You can define columns in a HBase table, and typically there are multiple levels. The highest level is the column family, and you can have individual columns inside a column family. The intersection of rows and columns is a cell, and HBase follows the big table design in allowing cells to have multiple values over time. These different cell values are ordered by a timestamp value. So how do you use HBase? HBase is built on top of the Hadoop framework. It uses HDFS for storage and works with Hadoop MapReduce. HBase is typically installed over a Hadoop cluster. So in the course, the easiest way to use HBase is to use Amazon's Elastic MapReduce. You can use Elastic MapReduce to define a cluster and then simply have HBase installed over that cluster for you. When you use HBase, your costs will be the instance costs along with the EMR costs that EMR charges per instance. So let's go ahead and do a live demo of HBase. You simply need to go to Elastic MapReduce to provision your HBase cluster. Alright, so click on Create Cluster. Let's give it a name. We'll call it HBase Demo. We'll leave termination protection on since we want to make sure that we can log in to this cluster and use HBase. So this is kind of different from a normal MapReduce cluster where you write stuff to S3 and simply deprovision. With HBase, we want to sort of keep this cluster alive, log into it, and maybe execute some queries. So we need to make sure that we have the termination protection on. We'll set logging on as default. I'll choose my logging folder that I have inside my bucket to keep those logs. We'll keep a key. We'll call it name HBase cluster node, for example. This will be propagated to the individual EMR instances. We'll stick with the standard Amazon distribution, and instead of installing Pig and Hive, we'll ask it to install HBase. So let's just do a standard HBase installation. We don't already have any data. We're not going to restore from backup, and I'm not going to set up backups either, but you can consider those when you are working on an actual application. We'll do the standard instances that they've defined. With HBase, I think by default Hadoop will provision larges for you. Make sure you have an EC2 key pair defined for these instances, because you want to be able to log into them, especially if you want access to the HBase shell. And we don't have any other operations, and we're not going to run any steps on this HBase cluster. We're just going to provision this through EMR, and then we're going to log into the master node and run a few commands. So once everything is confirmed, just go ahead and click on Create Cluster. So the provisioning process will take a few minutes, and then once it's provisioned, we can go ahead and log into the cluster to test it out. Okay, now that the cluster has started, you should be able to see that the debugging and start HBase steps are complete, and then your cluster will go into sort of a waiting state because you've asked it not to terminate after all the steps are completed. So now the HBase cluster is ready for you to use. So simply visit, you can simply SSH into the master DNS node to access the cluster. So let's connect to the instance. I'm just going to SSH to the machine. With EMR Hadoop clusters, your username is typically Hadoop, and then we'll just add the DNS name of the instance to the end. Now that it's connected and in the Elastic MapReduce master instance, you should be able to start using HBase. Alright, so once you're in the master node, simply you can start the HBase shell by typing in HBase space shell. For those of you familiar with MySQL, this is similar to sort of the MySQL client command. Once you're in the HBase shell, you can just simply type in help, and it'll give you a bunch of commands that you can run inside HBase. If you'd like to know what the status of your cluster is, simply type in status, and it'll tell you how many servers are part of this HBase cluster, if there were any dead nodes, and what the average load of the cluster is. Now, similar to DynamoDB, you have to specify a minimal set of schema for creating a table in HBase. In HBase, the requirement is simply to specify the column families, not the individual columns, just the column families that you will be using in a table. So let's try creating a table. Let's say create, and then we'll give a name, for example, users. And then it's going to ask you for a column family. So let's say info, for example, and hit enter. Now that we created the table, let's try describing it. So typically you'd have to enclose table names and column names inside the quotes. So here you go. It gave a description of the table users. The name is users, and it's got one family called info. To put a value in HBase, you simply use the put command followed by the name of the table. So we'll say users, and the next thing you want to do is give a row key. So let's say maybe John Doe. That's going to be the name of the row key, followed by the first field that you want to put in. So let's say info, and let's put in a value like regular user, maybe something like that. Okay, it looks like that may have worked. Let's try retrieving that same value, users, John Doe. And there we go. It actually retrieved that one row from the table, and it gives you the information of the as well as the cell information for that particular row. Now, another thing that you can do with HBase, which you also could do with DynamoDB, is scan an entire table. So if you simply say scan the name of the table, for example, users, and hit enter, it'll just return all of the rows as well as their column plus cell information. HBase also lets you count the number of rows in any table. So the command there is simply type in count and followed by the name of the table itself, users, and it'll return the number of rows that are present in that particular table. As usual, if you need any more information, you can go through the online documentation for HBase.